We are now about 3 years removed from experiencing Dune Part 1 for the first time. And if you are anything like me, that movie hooked you and left you wanting to see more. Going into Dune Part 1, I was a Dune rookie. I had no prior knowledge or experience with this world that I was about to be thrust into. And Denis Villeneuve brought this world to life in such great detail that I was instantly interested to see where this story goes next. And now Dune Part 2 is finally here, and at the risk of sounding like a lot of other people who are discussing this film right now, this film is everything you could want and more from a legitimate, memorable cinematic experience. Let's discuss.
I watch so you don't have to.
Before I get started, I'd like to kindly ask that you hit the like button, and please subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.
Come on. Do it. Do it!
If the last couple of years of going to the theater weekly and experiencing cinema has taught me anything, it's that legitimate filmmaking still works. It may not happen as often as it used to, but the reality of the situation is if you have a talented director bringing any given story to life, and if that director is left to do what they do best, and given the proper amount of time and resources to execute a vision, 9 times out of 10, magic will still happen.
Goddamn right, that's the only way I work, Cap.
We've seen it with Oppenheimer, we've seen it with Godzilla Minus One, we've seen it with Avatar 2, and yes, we've now seen it with Dune. I've known for some time now that Denis Villeneuve is a more than capable director. A lot of people like to point to movies like Blade Runner 2049 or even Arrival to prove that, but I always go back to Prisoners. To me, that movie is the perfect example of a director doing more with less. Because to me, that movie is literally carried by performances that he pulled out of the actors and the atmosphere. And the way that he took a story that we've seen a million times before, a missing person story, and he added his own unique spin to it. And from that moment on, I knew that he was going to be someone special.
He's good. With my help, he could be the best.
And then you take a look at what he is doing with the Dune franchise, and essentially, he's doing something very similar. He's taking your traditional sci-fi epic blockbuster and making it his own. He's taking a beloved story like Dune and elevating it cinematically. Now that's not taking a shot at the book by any means, because again, I haven't even read it. What I mean is that this Dune story in lesser cinematic hands might not have worked. When adapting anything that already has a built-in loyal fan base, it is important for the person who is adapting it to understand why people love it in the first place. And because of that, they need to take the responsibility of bringing it to life seriously. And to me, that is exactly what Denis Villeneuve is bringing to the table for the Dune franchise. Dune Part 2 pretty much picks up where Dune Part 1 leaves off, as we see Paul Atreides uniting with the Fremen while seeking revenge against the conspirators who destroyed his family. Facing the choice between the love of his life and the fate of the universe, he must prevent a terrible future only he can foresee. Now, I've already seen people hyping this movie up and saying it deserves to be in the conversation with movies like The Dark Knight and The Empire Strikes Back, as far as some of the greatest sequels or part 2s that have ever existed. Now, I don't know if I'm quite ready to go there just yet. Again, I like to have more time with these movies and have further viewings before I make proclamations like that. But I will say that Dune Part 2 does a lot of the same things that made those movies I just mentioned so iconic. Not only does it take the story and naturally progress it and elevate it as a sequel should, but it also manages to flip some of our expectations of what is going to happen next on their head.
You didn't see that coming.
Again, I don't have any real knowledge of Dune prior to seeing these movies, so if there are massive differences from the book, I won't be able to comment on that. But to see this story unexpectedly venture in a direction that I wasn't prepared for was an absolute breath of cinematic fresh air, especially when you consider that a lot of the modern movies we watch are incredibly predictable. Dune Part II to me is the second part of a hero's journey with a twist. There's a level of moral ambiguity bubbling just below the surface in this film. And that creates a conflict in the viewer because your natural instinct is to pull for Paul because we've already seen everything that he's been through. But he's also having visions throughout the film, so there's this underlying threat that things could go very bad if in fact he continues down this path of vengeance. And it's been a long time since I've seen a protagonist have that level of uncertainty around his story.
I'm in a glass case of emotion!
And that's a credit to how this character and this story has been constructed. Major props are deserved for Timothée Chalamet as well. An actor who I honestly was not sold on prior to his inclusion in Dune. And even before last year's Wonka, which was another pleasant surprise for me. He deserves a lot of credit for relaying a likability to his character, as well as a complexity through his performance. There are a couple of moments in this film where he kind of flicks a switch and you see a darker side to his personality. A side that you wouldn't think was possible just a few years prior to this movie existing. The first half of this story pretty much deals with Paul searching for acceptance, falling in love, and trying to integrate himself into Fremen culture. Now that would seem like a lot of area to cover for just one movie, but somehow this movie covers it in half a movie, albeit a longer movie, effortlessly.
Whoa!
If Dune Part I is considered a healthy introduction into this world, then Dune Part II can be described as diving headfirst and getting lost in this world. One scene that really stood out to me is when Paul has to basically complete one more task to gain acceptance into this culture. Because he needs these people to conquer his enemies. So he has to go to extremes to convince them that he is one of them, and that he is someone who is worthy of being followed. Now, I won't get into what the final test actually is to avoid spoilers, but I will say that the whole sequence is a treat for the eyes, the ears, and any other senses you might have in your body. It's one of those scenes where you can assume that things are going to go down a certain way, because if they don't, the movie's going to be a lot shorter than expected. But the way that it's executed still makes it one of the more intense scenes in the whole film. And again, that is a credit to the filmmaking.
That makes sense.
The second part of this film involves Paul making some difficult decisions, which leads to him uncovering some rather unfortunate revelations. And this leads to what only can be described as a very uncomfortable finale, in the best way possible. I assure you it is a finale that will stick with you long after the credits are rolling. As far as the other high spots of this movie, I could talk for days about the visuals and still not do them justice. If there's one thing we can learn from Dune, it's that budget is not everything when it comes to grand scale visuals. Execution is much more important. This film, as expected, has an epic visual scale to it. A scale that would absolutely obliterate your average summer blockbuster by comparison.
Don't bother.
Dune Part II is also a great example of how you take an already stacked cast and make it even better. In addition to your Zendayas and your Javier Bardems returning, of course, you have the added bonus of such actors as Christopher Walken and Austin Butler. A lot has already been said about Austin Butler's character and performance as the villain of this film. Some are calling him an instant icon and placing him amongst the greatest villains of all time. I'm not quite ready to go there just yet, but I will say this. Austin Butler has an amazing screen presence in this role. You will definitely remember him and want to know more about him, that's for sure. From a pure character perspective, meaning how he is written, I did find him to be a bit one note, if I'm being honest. And I'm not taking anything away from Butler's performance when I say that, because to me, that is what elevates this character from being somewhat ordinary to something a bit more memorable.
Because it's all part of the plan.
Also, special shout out to Rebecca Ferguson, who continues to be a high spot no matter the movie or the character. She's just always someone who commands your attention whenever she's on screen. I'd also be an absolute fool if I didn't mention Hans Zimmer's score. The guy consistently outdoes himself and instantly sets the tone with any film that he's involved with.
My man.
Overall, Dune Part II is everything you would expect and more from a proper continuation of this epic story. It has superb direction from start to finish. I would say masterful world building to the point that you're getting a lot of information, but it doesn't feel like you're getting a lot of information. Impressive visuals that are worthy of being seen on the biggest screen possible. Wall-to-wall great performances and characters. For a 2-hour and 45-minute film, it certainly did not feel like a 2-hour and 45-minute film. So I'd have to say it's an example of a perfectly paced film given the circumstances. To me, Dune Part 2 is what going to the movies is all about, and that's why it's getting the elusive Bill and Ted.
Excellent!
Y'all be cool. Right on.